For almost 1,000 years, there's been this one name in Jewish history that's been a huge source of confusion, and that name is Rabbad. Now, everyone agrees he was a brilliant scholar, an absolute giant of the medieval world, but depending on what you're reading, that name seems to describe two totally different people with completely opposite missions. So today, let's solve this 900-year-old historical riddle together.
So here's the puzzle, right? How can one single historical figure be remembered as both the intellectual forerunner to the great philosopher Maimonides and, at the exact same time, his most ferocious, his most relentless critic? It just doesn't seem possible. So let's put on our detective hats and start digging into the evidence. Okay, let's really break this down. On one side, you've got Rabbad the innovator. This is the guy who first brought Aristotle's systematic way of thinking into Jewish thought. He argued that faith and reason actually make each other stronger. I mean, he literally set the stage for Maimonides. But then, on the other side, you've got Rabbad the traditionalist, a master of Talmudic law who saw Maimonides attempt to create this single final legal code as a major threat to the whole tradition of debate. And he wrote these incredibly sharp, powerful objections to challenge him on it. So, which one is the real Rabbad?
All right, let's start our investigation with suspect number 1, a man named Abraham ibn Dawood. He was this towering intellectual figure from 12th century Spain, and he's the scholar that historians often call Rabbad I.
This timeline really drops us right into the heart of Al-Andalus, or Islamic Spain, which was a massive center of learning back then. He was born in Córdoba around 1110, churned out his most famous works in the 1160s, which was this period of just incredible creativity, and his life ended as a martyr in Toledo around 1180. His entire career really unfolded in this unbelievably vibrant intellectual scene. So we left behind these two monumental works. First, there's Sefer HaKabbalah, which is basically a history book with a very clear mission, to prove the unbroken authority of rabbinic tradition, all the way back to Moses. And then there's Emunah Rama, the Sublime Faith, which was just revolutionary. It was the very first attempt to systematically blend the philosophy of Aristotle with the principles of Judaism.
And that really gets us to his core project. Ibn Dawood truly believed that real philosophy and real religion were just two different paths leading to the exact same truth. He was making the case that reason isn't a threat to faith. No, it's a tool to understand it on a much deeper level. And this is what laid the essential groundwork for the philosophical revolution Maimonides was about to kick off. And to really see him in action as a historian, you've got to hear this story from his Sefer HaKabbalah. It's this dramatic tale of 4 great Babylonian rabbis who get captured by pirates. They're sold into slavery all across the Mediterranean, but each one is ransomed by the local Jewish community. Well, one of them, Rabbi Hanoch ben Moses, ends up in Córdoba. His genius is immediately recognized, and he basically transfers the crown of Torah from Babylonia all the way to Spain. It's an incredible story, and it's all designed to legitimize Spanish Jewry as the new center of the Jewish world.
Okay, so now, let's turn to our second guy. Our next suspect is another Abraham ben David, but this one was living over in Posquier, in what's now southern France. He was a contemporary of our first suspect, yeah, but his world and his whole intellectual mission were completely different.
So, to get this scholar, you have to understand this one word, hasagat. Now, it translates to objections, but that doesn't really do it justice. A hasagat is a sharp, precise, and often blistering scholarly critique that's written to publicly challenge another scholar's work. Think of it as the medieval equivalent of a very, very pointed peer review. And Abraham ben David of Posquier was so famous for these critiques that he actually earned a nickname, the Baal HaHasagat, which means the master of the objections. And believe me, this was not an insult. It was a title of respect. It spoke to his incredible intellectual rigor and his courage to challenge absolutely anyone, even the great Maimonides.
You can really get a sense of his personality from his writing. In one of his objections, he wrote this line, claiming that the Holy Spirit, a kind of divine inspiration, was present in his own academy. Now, this wasn't just him bragging. It was a claim to an authority that he saw as equal to, maybe even greater than, Maimonides' pure logic. He saw himself as defending a divinely guided tradition.
Ultimately, his goal wasn't just to poke holes in things. No, he was fighting a battle for the very soul of Jewish law. He was worried that Maimonides' incredible legal code, the Mishneh Torah, was so perfect, so comprehensive, that people might just stop studying the original Talmudic debates. His Hasagat were all about keeping that debate alive, making sure that Jewish law stayed a dynamic, living conversation, not some closed book.
So, We've got our two suspects, the philosopher from Spain who paved the way from Maimonides, and the critic from France who challenged him at every turn. The evidence is all in. I think it's time we finally solve this riddle.
And the solution to the whole riddle is, well, it's actually pretty simple. They were two different guys who just happened to live at the same time and share the same name. See, Rabat is an acronym for Rabbi Abraham ben David. So Abraham ibn Daud from Spain, he's known as Rabad I. And Abraham ben David of Pasquiers, he's known as Haravad. One was in Spain, a philosopher who came before Maimonides. The other was in France, a Talmudist who challenged him. Two men, two legacies, one very confusing acronym.
So, the mystery is solved. But untangling who was who lets us really appreciate just how important each of them was, in their own right. Their totally different approaches ended up shaping Jewish thought for centuries.
Abraham ibn Daud, the philosopher, he was the great synthesizer. He bravely built that first sturdy bridge connecting the world of Greek philosophy with Jewish revelation. Honestly, without his work, the intellectual world that Maimonides walked into would have looked completely different.
And Abraham ben David, the critic, he was the great challenger. He was the guardian of tradition, but not as some dusty thing in a museum. For him, it was a robust, living debate. His critiques made sure that no single voice, no matter how brilliant, could ever silence the multi-generational conversation of the Talmud. And this brings us to one last big thought. The story of these two Rabads, it isn't just ancient history. It's this perfect illustration of a timeless tension, right, between synthesis and critique, between the innovator who builds brand new bridges and the traditionalist who comes along to test their foundations. It leaves us with a question we are still wrestling with today. What's the real engine of progress, daring innovation or rigorous tradition?